Alright everyone, now that we've laughed about Antifa's sad gardening capabilities, we've got to talk about the slightly more serious political side of the Seattle autonomous zone, which on its surface it's nothing more than a LARP. The idea that you take over several blocks of a city and that because the police are trying to be restrained because they don't want incidents, that this means you've staged a coup or a revolution. It's really not the way that it works. There's not enough manpower in this particular zone or enough actual area in order for it to actually be functional. We've got both potentially disorganization at this point already. You've had infighting. You will probably continue to. I would imagine that there will be problems with the homeless population. I imagine that there'll be political issues within this particular zone quite often that at some point could lead to a brawl. And really, the best thing is for the government to stand back and do nothing. I'll tell you why. Stand back and aim cameras down at this zone so that the American people can see just how poorly conceived the idea is. How separatism and far leftism do not function. Once people see that, and it's already evident in a digital sense, I don't think they've actually run out of food. I mean, the idea that they're starting their garden with serious design to feed themselves is obviously bullshit. There's not enough acreage in this park, even if they terraform the whole thing properly. Even then, it would just be equivalent to an average-sized community garden effort. It could feed a few dozen people, certainly not hundreds or thousands. Let the American people, you can even have like a fucking live stream of this. Put some cameras up on a nearby office building roof, guarded of course against the potential for rock throwers or whatever. And then let the Americans see the dysfunction of the so-called autonomous zone. Leave it up for a few weeks, which is probably how long it'll last. Eventually, local business owners will complain about human filth. Namely people shitting. Trash removal is a thing. This is what happened with Occupy. Do you remember the Occupy protests? Anyone who's worried about this, by the way, oh my god, communists have taken territory on U.S. soil. See, we told you the U.S. is going to have a civil war. The Occupy protests were 100 times larger than this, encompassed multiple large cities. I knew someone who was like a lower level organizer in the Occupy movement many years ago. And the movement fell apart. It no longer exists. Now that's funny because it encompassed hundreds of thousands of people initially. Right now you have a few city blocks occupied by people who are LARPing. They have their masks and they have their little metal sentry shields and they have their community garden that'll be taxpayer repaired. And that's all they have. Now, the wider political implications, of course, some people see this and say, oh, well, this seems cool, and it's like the summer of love all over again, and probably be a growing thing for a few days. But again, if you have that many people in a fairly small area, you're going to tend to get problems anyway. These individuals will come to blows, potentially. The first time that some local business offers them free drinks, there's going to be problems. And again, I'm not encouraging any local bars to order a bunch of kegs and roll them in and say, oh, courtesy of the Seattle people, we support you. Here, have free Budweiser. It's on us, on tap all night for mini kegs and shit. I'm not encouraging anyone to do something like that or to, give them drugs. Of course, drugs are bad. Remember, drug war is a good thing. Thin blue line. But somebody probably will. And you got to understand, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Although the right wing is not really a force to be reckoned with in Seattle, I guarantee that there are some really inventive trolls there that are going to look for ways to fucking torment these people, because technically right now, under technical legal terms, they are declaring themselves to have staged a political insurrection. Technically speaking, they are no longer protected under the normal legal system. Under the normal legal classification, they have declared rebellion against the United States. There's a pretty damn clear-cut precedent for them not necessarily falling into the same legal protections as full-on citizens. They are essentially, in a de facto sense, you could argue, renouncing their citizenship and forming a new political union. What would happen if somebody were to start, dropping paint on them with drones or something like that? Would they be prosecuted? I'm not 100% sure. I mean, the police are avoiding the area. They're not going to see what's going on. What would happen if a bunch of people staged a counter-movement and they moved in since the police won't and they just decide to take care of it themselves? What happens if local shop owners go full roof Korean? This could happen. I'm not encouraging these things to happen. They could lead to actual violence, potentially even loss of life. But somebody might get that idea. When you get something like this going, local business owners, at least, I'm sure, eventually are going to complain. And eventually the police will be compelled to move back in and restore order. Now, right now, it's just sort of a slow simmering, I think. But again, give it time. The first time that somebody misses out on their meal, they get a little grumpy, somebody else gets a little drunk, maybe you have a fight starting. What you tend to get in organizations like this as well are factions. People tend to have a tendency to form order when order is absent. That's why you've got organization going on innately, despite the fact that these people supposedly hate organization and are anarchists in nature. The anarchists, by the way, will disagree eventually with the communists over the direction of their commune, or whatever you want to call it, and they'll probably beat on each other. People will attempt to appropriate influence and resources to themselves. It's a natural human biological tendency. The second that there are shortages, people will appropriate to themselves, they will cling to others able to appropriate, and they will form essentially what amounts to mobs or gangs. This is the problem of anarchism. This is why I'm also not an ANCAP. Anarcho-capitalism can't work any better. It would just be better organized. But the organization would still be innate. It would still devolve into essentially faction fighting, potentially. It just would be with capitalism. It just means that you'd be able to work and own things, but again, when there are shortages, you'd still have the problem of appropriation of resources being proper. Otherwise, you get fighting. You could say that in one essence, the leftists would actually be better off, at least temporarily, simply because they would have the actual the actual ideological capacity to organize. Problem being, it would all be tyrannical. This zone will fall apart. But it's an interesting LARP. It's very fun to watch. And by the way, the concept that private citizens shouldn't be able to get together and organize things themselves absent local authority, I actually would challenge. I think that it's fine. The problem is when you're taking established owned land, public resources, roads, parks, and so forth, and essentially stealing them from everyone else in the community in order to enforce your political opinions, that becomes criminal, number one, problematic ethically and politically, I think, number two. Number three, it just can't succeed. It's in an urban area. You're in a developed area. What you need to do is find undeveloped land. You need to buy some ranch of 500 acres out in the boondocks that's probably worth less than any of those apartment buildings, literally on paper, and start farming it. You can do that. You can make a commune if you want to. Nobody cares if you want to fly your commie flag above your wilted strawberry crops down in Tulsa or something. Nobody cares. Well, some people might, but, they're not going to give you any problems if you're out in the middle of nowhere. But that's the thing. These people want the Starbucks to be nearby. They want their college to be nearby. They don't like the rural people. They don't like the people that actually can grow food. They don't like those bumpkins out there, those small towners. They want to be in a city. They just want the city to be communistic. Well, the problem is the city can't grow its own food. And as soon as they decide to shut off power to this area, which they can easily do and probably should, there'll be problems too. Let these people, they want to be separatists, let them generate their own electricity. Let them literally grow their own food. Wall the area off and wait until they run out of resources. You can do that. Go ahead and put them under pressure. But you don't need to march the troops in. The problem will take care of itself. It'll spontaneously devolve at some point. It'll probably devolve into violence, unfortunately. And again, you'll get hecklers. You'll get people who will be very inventive at ways to potentially inconvenience these people because they're being a nuisance to the community. And again, if they're staging a self-proclaimed rebellion and a literal insurrection, the legal framework involved there is a little bit more shaky. Just keeping that in mind. That's about all. Peace out.